Hello, confirmation friends. Here we are. It's lesson number 4 today. Welcome to you. Welcome to confirmation class. Thank you for joining me. Today we have probably one of my most favorite lessons of all about the Wilderness School. It's chapter 3 in your Manna and Mercy book. Exodus chapter 16 in your Bibles tells the same story, so I hope you've both had a look at both of those at this point. This is a very foundational lesson for everything else that will come, and in fact for Christian life and living. So the lessons of the Wilderness School are important, and we still enact them actually week after week when we normally gather for worship at First Lutheran Church. So welcome. This is a pretty straightforward lesson, so I'm not sure how long this is going to take, but we will just see. Welcome. I'm going to start with a little bit of review so that we just keep the story in mind. One of my hopes for this year is that by the end you will have kind of a sense of the entire biblical story in your mind that you can kind of keep there forever. The basic outline of the whole story, then it will be really easy for you when you hear details in the story to slot those in to where you know the bigger story is, right? So where do the details fit in the larger story? If you have a larger story, you can always figure out how the little details fit into the rest of the story. In Genesis 12, God called Abraham to figure out a better way of bringing to fulfillment all that God had intended when God created the universe and everything in it, right? God decided, I'm going to have a loving relationship of blessing with one family, and I will bless them and remain committed to them for all time so that they can share the blessings that they receive from me and share the same kind of commitment that I have for them with all the other people they encounter in the world. So that person's name was Abraham, and the family was the family of Abraham and Sarah. And here's the little family tree that I showed you last time. So the blessing came through Isaac, and then Jacob, Isaac and his wife Rebecca, and then through Jacob and his wives Rachel and Leah, and then through their 12 sons who became kind of the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, eventually, as we know from last time, they became slaves in Egypt. They suffered there for many years in a system that was shaped like a pyramid, right? Like an Egyptian pyramid, where there were a few big deals on top who benefited from the work of everybody below them, mostly the big slave class who worked for very little or nothing. And so there were a few people who benefited, a few big deals at the top supported by the religion and by the military. That person's name at the top was Pharaoh, who was a godlike figure. Now the people suffered under this system, and so they cried out to God to set them free. God heard their calls because God hates that system where there are a few big deals on top and a lot of little deals on the bottom. And so God promised to free them, and God sent them some leaders to lead them out of slavery from Egypt, and those leaders' names are Moses and his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam, and they led the people out of slavery from Egypt. And if you remember, they led them through the Red Sea, through the waters of the Red Sea, from slavery into freedom. Now this event is known as the Exodus, and last week you read some details about the story from the Bible, from the book of the Bible that is named for that event, called Exodus. You probably are familiar with the term exit, which means a way out, and Exodus has the same meaning. It was a way out of Egypt. So exit and Exodus, the words are related. This event where God freed the Israelite slaves from slavery is known as the Exodus. Now this is probably the most important event in the entire Old Testament. So the Old Testament is that part of the Bible that tells the story of God's people up until the birth of Jesus. And the rest of the story is contained in what we know as the New Testament, the story of Jesus and the early church. In the Old Testament, probably the most important event is the Exodus. So it's very, very important that God freed the slaves from slavery in that event at the Red Sea called the Exodus. Last time I suggested that maybe if you wanted a good visual or dramatic representation of that event, you could watch one of the movies, one of the many movies made about it. Probably the most famous is called The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston as Moses. But more recently, Disney made a great movie called The Prince of Egypt, an animated movie, which also tells the story and shows the Exodus from Egypt in a very dramatic way. So both of those I commend to you, and maybe you can watch those sometime. Now the people were they leave Egypt, they go through the waters of the Red Sea, and then they find themselves in the wilderness. The wilderness of Sinai, we would call it today. For like 40 years they were there. So I showed you the map last time. Here's the route that they took. Here's through Egypt, and then they go through the waters of the Red Sea here. Whoops, that's not very good. So they go they start over here, and then they go through the waters of the Red Sea here, and then for 40 years they wander in the wilderness of Sinai here before eventually they come up here and cross the River Jordan to the Promised Land. But that's a long way away. So they're wandering in the wilderness here. Now, they start moving down this way. And at some point in the story, they get down to here, to Elim. And somewhere between Elim and Sinai, the mountain where they receive the Ten Commandments, somewhere in here, they start to complain. They start to complain to Moses because there's not very much to eat. And they start to grumble and complain. And they say, why did you lead us out here to die? Why didn't you just leave us in Egypt where we were slaves? At least we got fed once a day. So the people forget very, very quickly how hard the conditions were in Egypt. They forget very quickly what an awful system it was to have a few big deals at the top and a bunch of little deals at the bottom supporting the big deals at the top. They forget all about the hard life in Egypt. They forget how badly they wanted to be free. Well, what they discover in the wilderness is that freedom is often not easy. They think they don't have the security that they had back in Egypt. But as we see in the story, that's an illusion. They actually do have a tremendous security. And the security is that they have a God who cares for them and who will provide for them. So Moses goes to God and says, the people are complaining about me, they have nothing to eat. And God says, I have heard their cry, and I will feed them. I will feed them in the morning. All they have to do is go out in the morning and collect this white, flaky substance that will be on the ground. In the evening, I will send them quails, these little birds that they can eat for meat in the evening. Now this, as you read in Manna and Mercy, is a teaching moment. This is a moment when God decides, this is a time I can teach the people something extremely important about being a different kind of people and a different kind of society to what they were way back in Egypt. I am going to form a new kind of people and a new kind of society in the wilderness by teaching them lessons in the wilderness. I can use the wilderness to teach the people lessons that will shape them into a new kind of people the world has never seen before. So God says, this is what's going to happen. I'll send the manna. I'll send this white flaky substance in the morning. Now, it's called in the Bible manna. There we go, manna. And I wrote the word in Hebrew here, manna. And in Hebrew, really, it's a question, manna. And the question, translated into English, means, what is it? Because when the people came out in the morning and found this substance, this white flaky substance that tastes kind of like honey, as you read about it in your biblical assignment this week, they didn't know what it was. They'd never really seen it before. It was white, it was flaky, tasted kind of sweet like honey. And they said, "What is it?" "Manna." So they just called it that. Manna. And that is what they called it from then on. So God uses this manna to teach them some things. Now, as you know, the manna would appear every morning for 6 days of the week. But because God wanted the people to rest from work on the seventh day and dedicate the seventh day to something else besides collecting and distributing the manna, God sent enough manna on the sixth day for the sixth and seventh days. Okay. What happened if somebody tried to collect more manna than they needed for that day and tried to save it and hoard it so they'd have like a savings bank of manna that might build up over time in case they were afraid a day came when God wouldn't send the manna? Well, the manna wouldn't keep. Any extra manna that they had left over that night would just simply rot. And as you read in the biblical readings, worms would come, like maybe maggots or something, and grow and eat it, and it would start to stink. So they had enough manna arriving in the morning to collect for that day and feed them all. Now they were broken into family groups, into clans. They probably tented in family clans in the wilderness. So the larger clans would collect more manna, and the smaller clans would collect less manna because they had fewer people to feed. But it would just be enough for everybody. And there was not a lot left over. If they tried to save any, it would rot and stink. But the next day, enough manna would come for everybody again. God would be dependable and provide everybody with enough. But in this way, nobody could hoard the manna, so there wouldn't eventually emerge big deals in society who had a lot and little deals who had a little. Everybody would just receive the same amount each day. So out of this experience, God wanted to teach the people 3 lessons. And these are the lessons outlined in Manna and Mercy. The 3 lessons of wilderness school are: lesson number 1, God gives manna for all. And the "for all" is important. So I kind of wrote it in bold letters. God gives manna for all. Doesn't matter who you are, or what you look like, or how old you are, or anything. It doesn't matter. God gives enough manna for every single person in that society. All food is God's. In fact, everything is God's. Everything in all creation is God's. We don't actually own anything. Everything is God's, and God gives us what we need for that day. And we can trust God to keep sending us daily bread. Our work consists of collecting the manna, collecting the stuff, and distributing it, and making sure that everybody has enough for that day. That is what our daily work consists of. That's another kind of sub-lesson of this main lesson, that God gives manna for all. That's what our daily work consists of, making sure that everybody has what they need. That is the meaning of work. God will give enough, and so hoarding is unnecessary. So, lesson 1, God gives manna for all. Okay. Now, lesson number 2 is that hoarding stinks. When they tried to collect more than their share of manna and tried to save it for the future, it just rotted and began to stink, and the worms would come to eat it. This is so different from the way that they had learned in Egypt, right? Where the whole point of the system that was shaped like this was for the big deals at the top to hoard as much as they possibly could, so that they had an excess amount of everything and the people on the bottom had less than they needed. God hates that system, as I said last week. So this way, it teaches the lesson that hoarding leads to societal rot and decay. It is not God's intention that some have more while others go without. So lesson number 2, hoarding stinks. So lesson number 1, God gives manna for all. Lesson number 2, hoarding stinks. And then the third lesson has to do with that gift of the Sabbath day, the day of resting from work. The gift of Sabbath was the third lesson that God wished to share in the wilderness. The gift of Sabbath is a beautiful gift that God gives the people. On the 6th day, God would send enough manna for 2 days, for the 6th and 7th days, so that on the 7th day, the people could rest from their work of gathering and distributing the manna. What would they do instead? Well, they would get to experience the gift of friendship. They would have time to develop their relationships with each other, to just enjoy each other, to play with one another. They would have the gift of time to just spend with one another. Another benefit of the Sabbath, another friendship that could be nurtured, was friendship with God. They would have time to give God thanks for all the blessings of that week. They would have time to give God thanks for taking them out of Egypt from a terrible situation. They would have time to give God thanks for guiding them through the Red Sea under the leadership of Moses and Aaron and Miriam. They would have time to give God thanks and to think about and to give God thanks for the blessings in the wilderness, for the gift of manna, and for the gift of one another. They would have a day to give God thanks for the gift of hope for the future, that God was leading them somewhere and turning them into a people that would be something like the world had never seen before. And then finally, another blessing of the gift of Sabbath day would be that they could nurture their friendship with nature, with creation. They could enjoy the world. They could enjoy the beautiful world that God has made. They could run and play outside. They could explore maybe the world around them and see the wonders of creation that God has made. The world is a beautiful place, and it benefits. We benefit from having time to explore it. God wanted the people to have the gift of time to do these things, to explore their friendship with God, their friendship with others, and their friendship with nature. The gift of Sabbath, the gift of ceasing from work on the 7th day. So we have the 3 lessons of wilderness school that we've been learning about so far. God gives manna for all, hoarding stinks, and the gift of Sabbath. God is not done teaching the people or giving the people gifts yet. Next time, we are going to learn about something that happens a little bit further down the road at the mountain called Sinai or Horeb. Same thing down here in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula. God gives an amazing gift to the people there. That is what we are going to explore next time. But for now, please keep in mind these lessons of the Wilderness School for this week. We'll be returning to them throughout the confirmation class because they are foundational to the kind of people that we want to become at First Lutheran Church as a community of God's people. Thank you for taking the time to view this video. Thank you so much for continuing to do the assignments. I will send out another assignment and video next Monday. Until then, have a good week. Be well. Keep safe. Know that I love you and I miss you, and I will look forward to being in touch again next time. Bye-bye.